Brooklyn Rose woke up with blood under her fingernails and no memory of how it got there. The crimson stains on her white bedsheets looked like a crime scene, and the taste of copper in her mouth made her stomach lurch with terror. She stumbled to the bathroom mirror, her reflection revealing scratches across her neck that she definitely didn't have when she went to sleep. But the real nightmare began when she turned on the morning news and saw her own face staring back at her. Dr. Brooklyn Rose, renowned forensic psychologist, is wanted for questioning in connection with 3 brutal murders, the reporter announced as Brooklyn's professional headshot filled the screen. Her legs gave out, sending her crashing to the bathroom floor as the impossible words echoed in her mind. The victim's name scrolled across the bottom of the screen: Sarah Chen, Michael Rodriguez, Jennifer Walsh, people she'd never met, never seen, never even heard of until this moment. Yet somehow her business cards were found clutched in each of their dead hands. The sound of sirens in the distance made Brooklyn's blood freeze. They were coming for her, and she had no idea why. Her phone exploded with notifications, missed calls from Detective Marcus Webb, text messages from colleagues, and news alerts that made her name trend on social media as the psychologist's serial killer. The irony would have been laughable if it wasn't destroying her life in real time. She who studied monsters was now being hunted as one. Brooklyn's hands shook as she scrolled through the crime scene photos that had somehow leaked online. Each victim was positioned identically to cases from her published research, down to the smallest detail. The killer wasn't just copying her work, they were framing her with surgical precision. Every piece of evidence pointed directly to her expertise, her methods, her psychological profile of organized serial offenders. Someone had studied her more thoroughly than she'd ever studied them. The front door burst open downstairs, followed by heavy footsteps and shouted commands. "Police! Search warrant!" Brooklyn's entire world collapsed as she realized she had maybe 30 seconds before they found her cowering in her bathroom like a guilty criminal. But she wasn't guilty, was she? The blood under her nails suggested otherwise, and the growing blank spaces in her memory terrified her more than any killer she'd ever profiled. She grabbed her laptop and frantically searched for any security footage from the previous night. Her home cameras showed her going to bed at 10:47 p.m., but then the feed went dark for exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. When it resumed at 3:04 a.m., she was returning home through the back door, moving with strange purpose, carrying something wrapped in plastic. Brooklyn watched herself dispose of bloody clothes in her own washing machine with mechanical efficiency, as if she'd done it 100 times before. Detective Webb's voice echoed from downstairs. "Brooklyn, we know you're here. Come down slowly with your hands visible." The man who'd been her partner, her friend, maybe something more, was now hunting her like any other suspect. Brooklyn deleted the security footage with trembling fingers, knowing it was either evidence of her guilt or the only proof of her innocence. She couldn't tell which anymore. As police footsteps thundered up the stairs, Brooklyn's reflection in the bathroom mirror revealed something that made her soul scream. Behind her right ear, barely visible beneath her dark hair, was a small puncture wound that looked like an injection site. Someone had been drugging her, controlling her, using her own sleepwalking episodes against her. But the realization came too late. The bathroom door exploded inward as tactical officers flooded in with weapons drawn. "Dr. Brooklyn Rose, you're under arrest for the murders of Sarah Chun, Michael Rodriguez, and Jennifer Walsh," Detective Webb announced, his voice heavy with betrayal and disbelief. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Brooklyn caught sight of a figure watching from across the street, a tall man with silver hair and cold blue eyes who smiled at her with satisfaction. She'd seen that face before in academic journals and conference photos. Dr. Richard Blackwood, her former mentor's research partner, the man who disappeared from academia 5 years ago after a scandal involving unauthorized human experiments. Brooklyn's last thought before they dragged her away was the horrible realization that she wasn't the hunter or the hunted, she was the weapon. Someone had turned her into a murder machine, and now she was about to pay the price for crimes committed by her own hands while her mind was imprisoned in pharmaceutical chains. The real killer was still free, still watching, still planning whatever came next in this twisted psychological experiment. Brooklyn's cell in county lockup felt like a tomb designed specifically for her destruction. 3 days without sleep, 3 days of interrogation, 3 days of watching security footage that showed her committing murders she couldn't remember. The other inmates whispered about the crazy shrink who killed people with her bare hands, and Brooklyn was beginning to wonder if they were right. Maybe she really was the monster she'd spent her career studying. Detective Webb sat across from her in the interrogation room, his eyes red with exhaustion and something that looked like grief. "Brooklyn, I've known you for 8 years. I've seen you cry over victims you never met, lose sleep over cases that weren't even yours. But this evidence, double quotes, he spread crime scene photos across the metal table like a deck of cards dealing death. Your fingerprints are on the murder weapons. Your DNA's under their fingernails. The security cameras show you entering and leaving each crime scene. The photos hit Brooklyn like physical blows. Sarah Chun's broken body arranged exactly as Brooklyn had described in her doctoral thesis. Michael Rodriguez positioned to match her published paper on organized killer methodology. Jennifer Walsh displayed according to Brooklyn's lecture notes from last semester. Someone hadn't just studied her work, they'd memorized it, internalized it, used it to create a perfect psychological trap. "I don't remember any of this," Brooklyn whispered, her voice hoarse from days of denying her own guilt. "Marcus, you have to believe me. Someone is controlling me, drugging me. Look at this." She pulled back her hair to show him the injection site behind her ear, but Webb's expression didn't change. He'd already made up his mind about her guilt. Brooklyn's court-appointed attorney entered the room with a manila folder that made her blood run cold. "Dr. Rose, we need to discuss your defense strategy. The prosecution has security footage from 17 different locations showing you stalking these victims for weeks before their deaths. They have search histories from your computer detailing their daily routines. They have recorded phone calls where you discuss the best methods for subduing victims without leaving defensive wounds. The words hit Brooklyn like ice water. She had no memory of making those calls, conducting that surveillance, planning those murders. But the evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, perfectly orchestrated. Someone had been using her body while her conscious mind was locked away somewhere in pharmaceutical darkness. The realization that she was living in her own worst nightmare, being controlled by a criminal mind, made her want to scream until her vocal cords tore. Her attorney continued reading from the folder with clinical detachment. The prosecution is seeking the death penalty based on the premeditated nature of the crimes and your alleged expertise in criminal psychology. They're arguing that you used your professional knowledge to commit what they're calling the perfect murders. Brooklyn laughed bitterly at the irony. If these were perfect murders, she wouldn't be sitting in jail. Someone wanted her caught, wanted her destroyed, wanted her to suffer. That evening, alone in her cell, Brooklyn received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Richard Blackwood walked into the visitor room wearing an expensive suit and a smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. "Hello, Brooklyn. You look terrible." He settled into the chair across from her with disturbing familiarity, as if visiting accused murderers was his weekend hobby. "You did this to me," Brooklyn said, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. "You've been drugging me, controlling me, using me as your personal killing machine." Blackwood's smile widened with genuine amusement. "Such a fascinating theory. Do you have any proof of this alleged mind control? Any evidence that doesn't point directly to your guilt?" Brooklyn leaned forward, studying his micro-expressions with every tool her psychological training had given her. "You were Jonathan Hayes' research partner before he was framed for those murders 5 years ago. You disappeared from academia right after his conviction. You've been planning this revenge ever since." Blackwood nodded approvingly, like a professor pleased with his student's deduction. "Very good, Brooklyn. But you're missing the most important piece of the puzzle." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small device that looked like a hearing aid. "This is a prototype neural interface I developed during my years in pharmaceutical research. When implanted behind the ear, it can influence behavior, suppress memory formation, even induce complex actions while the subject sleeps. The injection site heals within days, leaving no permanent evidence." Brooklyn felt her world collapse as Blackwood continued his casual explanation of her psychological violation. "You see, Brooklyn, you ruined my life when you helped convict Jonathan. He was the perfect fall guy, brilliant but unstable, obsessed with you to an unhealthy degree. But your testimony was so convincing, so thorough, that even I believed you'd identified the real killer. It took me 3 years to realize you'd simply been lucky, not skilled." The visiting room began to spin as Brooklyn understood the full scope of her victimization. "So you decided to prove that anyone could be turned into a killer with the right pharmaceutical persuasion. You used me as your test subject." Blackwood checked his watch with theatrical precision. "The best part is, tomorrow the prosecution will present their final piece of evidence. Video confession you recorded 3 nights ago while under pharmaceutical influence." In it, you describe in detail how you selected your victims, how you planned their deaths, even how you felt while killing them. Brooklyn's hands clenched into fists as Blackwood stood to leave. The beauty of my work, Dr. Rose, is that even if you somehow prove you were drugged, it doesn't change the fact that your hands committed those murders. Your fingerprints wielded those weapons. Your voice made that confession. In the eyes of the law, you are guilty regardless of your mental state during the crimes. As he walked away, Brooklyn realized she was trapped in a psychological prison far more sophisticated than any physical cell. The real monster was walking free while she faced execution for his crimes. Brooklyn's trial began on a Monday that felt like Judgment Day. The courtroom packed with reporters, victims' families, and curious spectators who wanted to see the famous forensic psychologist who'd become a serial killer. Brooklyn sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit that made her look guilty before a single word was spoken. Her attorney, David Morrison, was competent but outmatched by a prosecution team that included the district attorney herself, a woman determined to make Brooklyn's case the centerpiece of her political career. The prosecution's opening statement painted Brooklyn as a calculating monster who used her psychological expertise to commit perfect murders. District Attorney Sarah Vance paced in front of the jury like a predator stalking prey, her voice dripping with righteous indignation. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Brooklyn Rose didn't just study serial killers, she became one. Using knowledge gained from years of criminal research, she selected innocent victims and murdered them with surgical precision. Brooklyn watched the jurors' faces as Vance displayed the crime scene photographs on massive screens. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to horror to disgust as they saw the bodies arranged exactly as Brooklyn's academic papers had described. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, perfectly crafted to destroy any reasonable doubt about her guilt. Even Brooklyn was beginning to doubt her own innocence. The first witness was Detective Marcus Webb, Brooklyn's former partner, who now testified against her with visible pain etched across his features. Dr. Rose consulted on over 40 murder investigations during our partnership. She had intimate knowledge of crime scene analysis, victim selection patterns, and forensic countermeasures. If anyone could commit the perfect murder, it would be someone with her expertise. Brooklyn's attorney tried to establish reasonable doubt during cross-examination, but Webb's testimony was devastating. Detective Webb, did Dr. Rose ever display violent tendencies during your professional relationship? Morrison asked desperately. Webb's answer cut through Brooklyn like a blade. She was obsessed with understanding violence. Sometimes I wondered if she was getting too close to the darkness she studied. Now I know she crossed that line completely. The prosecution's second witness made Brooklyn's blood freeze with recognition. Tom Rose, her ex-husband, walked to the witness stand wearing a perfectly pressed suit and an expression of grieving betrayal. Brooklyn's work consumed her, he testified, his voice trembling with emotion. She would stay up all night reading about murders, studying crime scene photos, even role-playing different scenarios. Our daughter Emma started having nightmares about the monsters Mommy worked with. Brooklyn wanted to scream that Tom was lying, that their marriage had ended because of his gambling addiction and emotional abuse, not her career dedication. But the jury was eating up his performance, seeing a concerned father protecting his child from a murderous mother. When Morrison cross-examined Tom, he painted Brooklyn as a devoted mother who would never harm anyone. Tom's response destroyed her last hope. That's what made it so shocking. "Your Honor, the woman I married could never commit these crimes, but people change. Darkness changes them." The third day of trial brought the prosecution's most damaging evidence, the security footage showing Brooklyn stalking her victims for weeks before their deaths. The jury watched in horrified silence as Brooklyn followed Sarah Chun through grocery stores, sat outside Michael Rodriguez's apartment building, even attended Jennifer Walsh's yoga classes. The methodical surveillance looked exactly like the behavior Brooklyn had described in her academic papers about organized serial killers. But the footage also revealed something the prosecution hadn't noticed, something that gave Brooklyn her first glimmer of hope. In every video, Brooklyn's movements were mechanical, purposeful, but somehow empty. She never looked directly at the camera, never displayed any awareness of her surroundings beyond her targets. Her body language suggested someone operating under external control rather than conscious choice. Brooklyn whispered urgently to her attorney during a recess. "David, look at my eyes in those videos. Really look at them. I'm not conscious. I'm sleepwalking through those surveillance sessions." Morrison reviewed the footage with new attention, finally seeing what Brooklyn had recognized. Her pupils were consistently dilated, her facial expressions blank, her movements robotic. She looked like someone under pharmaceutical influence. The breakthrough came when Morrison subpoenaed Brooklyn's medical records and discovered something shocking. For the past 6 months, Brooklyn had been experiencing chronic insomnia and visiting her doctor for sleep medication. The prescriptions were signed by Dr. Richard Blackwood, who had somehow obtained a medical license under a false identity and established himself as Brooklyn's treating physician. Morrison stood to address the court with new evidence. "Your Honor, I move to present expert testimony regarding pharmaceutical mind control and involuntary criminal behavior. The defense has discovered that Dr. Rose was systematically drugged by the real perpetrator, who used her body to commit these crimes while her conscious mind was suppressed. The prosecution objected furiously, but the judge allowed the testimony. Dr. Elizabeth Chun, a neurochemist specializing in behavioral modification drugs, explained to the jury how sophisticated pharmaceutical compounds could suppress memory formation while maintaining motor function. Someone could theoretically be programmed to perform complex actions while having no conscious awareness or memory of their behavior. The technology exists, and the victim would appear perfectly guilty based on physical evidence. As Dr. Chen testified about neural interfaces and behavioral control, Brooklyn caught sight of a familiar figure in the courtroom gallery. Dr. Richard Blackwood sat 3 rows back, watching the proceedings with clinical interest, taking notes like a researcher observing his own experiment. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and his slight smile confirmed what Brooklyn had suspected. He was enjoying every moment of her public destruction, even as the defense was building a case that could set her free. The real question wasn't whether Brooklyn was innocent. It was whether anyone would believe the truth was stranger and more terrifying than fiction. Tomorrow would bring the prosecution's final witness, and Brooklyn realized with growing dread that Blackwood had one more card to play in his twisted psychological game. The courtroom held its breath as the prosecution's star witness took the stand. Dr. Emma Rose, Brooklyn's 12-year-old daughter, walked to the witness box wearing a blue dress and an expression of heartbreaking confusion. Brooklyn felt her soul shatter as she realized Blackwood's final move, using her own child to deliver the killing blow to her defense. District Attorney Vance's voice was gentle, motherly, as she questioned Emma about living with an accused serial killer. "Emma, sweetheart, did your mother ever bring her work home? Did she talk about hurting people?" Emma's small voice carried across the silent courtroom like a death sentence. "Mommy would practice on me sometimes. She'd show me how to sneak up on people without making noise. She said it was a game, but it scared me." Brooklyn watched her daughter's testimony through tears of rage and helplessness. Every innocent childhood memory was being twisted into evidence of premeditated murder. Emma's bedtime stories about catching bad guys became training sessions for victim stalking. Their games of hide and seek were reframed as practice for avoiding security cameras. Blackwood had poisoned even her most precious memories. But something in Emma's testimony didn't match the prosecution's narrative. When Vance asked about Brooklyn's behavior during the months leading up to the murders, Emma's answer surprised everyone. Mommy was different. She would sleepwalk and do things she didn't remember. "Sometimes I found her in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, just standing there with her eyes open, but not really awake. It was like someone else was controlling her body." Defense attorney Morrison jumped on Emma's observation during cross-examination. "Emma, when your mother was sleepwalking, did she act like herself?" Emma shook her head vigorously. "No, she moved different, like a robot. And her voice was weird when she talked. Plus, she never remembered anything the next morning, even when I told her about it." The jury's expression shifted as Emma unwittingly provided the defense's strongest evidence. This wasn't the testimony of a child afraid of her murderous mother. It was the observation of someone who'd witnessed pharmaceutical mind control firsthand. Morrison pressed his advantage. "Emma, did anyone else ever visit your mother during these episodes? Someone who might have given her medicine or shots?" Emma's eyes widened with sudden memory. "The doctor man. He came to our house lots of times when Mommy was sleepwalking. He had a bag with needles and stuff. He told me it was special medicine to help Mommy sleep better, but I had to keep it secret because it was experimental." Brooklyn's heart soared as her daughter unknowingly identified Dr. Richard Blackwood as her pharmaceutical puppeteer. Morrison immediately called for a sidebar conference with the judge. "Your Honor, this child has just identified the real perpetrator, Dr. Richard Blackwood, who has been systematically drugging my client and using her as an unwitting instrument of murder. I request an immediate warrant for his arrest. but when court security searched the gallery, Blackwood had vanished like smoke. The prosecution's case began unraveling as investigators discovered Blackwood's false medical license, his access to experimental drugs, and his history of unauthorized human experimentation. The neural interface device found in Brooklyn's apartment matched patents filed under Blackwood's name 5 years earlier. The pharmaceutical compounds in her blood tests corresponded exactly to his research into behavioral modification drugs. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, Dr. Jonathan Hayes, the man Brooklyn had helped wrongfully convict 5 years earlier. Released from prison just days before Brooklyn's trial, Hayes testified via video link from protective custody. Dr. Blackwood told me he was going to prove that anyone could be turned into a killer with the right pharmaceutical persuasion. He said Brooklyn Rose would be his masterpiece, the famous forensic psychologist who became a serial killer. Hayes' testimony revealed the full scope of Blackwood's revenge plot. He blamed Dr. Rose for my conviction because her psychological profile was so convincing. He spent 3 years planning her destruction, studying her habits, gaining her trust as a treating physician, then slowly introducing the neural control protocols. He told me he wanted to prove that free will was an illusion and that anyone could be programmed to kill. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with their verdict: not guilty by reason of pharmaceutical incapacitation. Brooklyn collapsed in her chair as the words washed over her like absolution. She was free, but the victory felt hollow knowing that Blackwood was still out there, still planning, still experimenting on innocent people. 6 months later, Brooklyn stood before a Senate subcommittee investigating pharmaceutical mind control and involuntary criminal behavior. Her testimony helped pass legislation requiring strict oversight of neural interface research and behavioral modification drugs. Emma sat in the gallery, proud of her mother who had survived the ultimate psychological experiment and was now fighting to protect others from similar victimization. The investigation into Dr. Richard Blackwood continued, but the man himself remained a phantom. He disappeared into the shadows of illegal research, probably working on his next psychological experiment. Brooklyn knew he was still out there, still believing he could prove that human free will was nothing more than a chemical illusion waiting to be manipulated. But Brooklyn had learned something Blackwood would never understand. The human spirit was stronger than any drug, any neural interface, any pharmaceutical prison. She'd survived his ultimate psychological experiment and emerged not as a broken victim, but as a warrior determined to protect others from the monsters who hid behind medical degrees and research credentials. As Brooklyn embraced Emma after the Senate hearing, she whispered a promise that would guide the rest of her career. No one will ever use someone else's mind as a weapon again. Not on my watch. The real monsters weren't the ones who killed with their hands. They were the ones who stole free will itself. And Brooklyn Rose had just declared war on them all. This psychological nightmare proves that the most terrifying monsters are the ones who can steal your mind while leaving your body intact. If Brooklyn Rose's harrowing journey into pharmaceutical hell kept you on the edge of your seat, Smash that subscribe button for more mind-bending thrillers that explore the darkest possibilities of human control. Share this story with anyone brave enough to question whether their thoughts are truly their own. And drop a comment about which moment made you question everything you believe about free will. The line between victim and perpetrator has never been thinner, and we're just beginning to explore how easily it can be crossed. Hit that notification bell because the next story might make you check your own memories for gaps you can't explain.